Shalom. I'm Rabbi Arthur Waskow. I'm director of the Shalom Center. And I've been thinking about, you might say, the prehistory of myself as a serious Jew and the prehistory of the whole renaissance of Jewish thought, rejuvenation of Jewish thought, a pun, that happened in the mid and late 1960s. And they gave rise to much of what has become the deep enrichment and transformation of Judaism. I'm thinking of a couple of moments when the civil rights movement of the 60s intersected with Jews in a very powerful way. One of those was in the summer of 1964 in Atlantic City when the Democratic National Convention was meeting, and when there came to the Democratic Convention a delegation from the state of Mississippi. It was a strange delegation because it had been elected by an informal, unofficial election held in churches all over the state, in which people voted who were not allowed by the state to vote. Black people, and some whites as well, voted. They made themselves into what they called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, led by Fannie Lou Hamer, an extraordinary woman, a sharecropper who had been badly beaten by the Mississippi police for trying to register to vote, and who was in the forefront of registering black folk in those days in Mississippi who weren't allowed to vote any other way. And they came to Atlantic City to the Democratic Convention saying, look, we are the real Democratic Party of Mississippi. The others are all white, all segregationists, all elected by all whites, and they don't really represent the Democratic Party as it should be in Mississippi. And we asked the National Democratic Party to seat us as delegates. It wasn't easy. The Credentials Committee, which made that decision, was mostly made up of members of Congress and hardened Democratic politicians. The President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, was really opposed to seating the Mississippi Freedom Democrats. He was afraid that watching that on national television would turn the South against him during his campaign for president, and that he might even lose, but that he would certainly lose the southern states that he himself came from, like Texas. And so he was opposed. And most Democratic politicians don't like to oppose an incumbent Democratic president. So it was a real struggle to get the Credentials Committee even to pay attention. But Fannie Lou Hamer testified, and there was national television coverage, and all over the country people began to listen and to pay attention. And then Dr. Martin Luther King came at the invitation of the Freedom Party to talk to, lobby members of the Credentials Committee. I was there because they had also asked former congressional assistants who knew the members of the Credentials Committee to come to also make some connections. So I was there and I watched Dr. King, the only time I actually met him. I watched him. He had a broken leg. It was 110 or 115 degrees hot in the air-conditioned parts of the Atlantic City Convention Hall. He was working. It was not a matter of charisma. Oh, this is what I think. And then the Democratic politician said, yes, Dr. King. It was hard work. One by one by one, he met with those politicians and persuaded enough of them to force the issue to the floor of the convention. Now, I said there was an intersection with Jewish life. What was the intersection? Because at that point in my life, I was an activist for civil rights and against the Vietnam War, which was just beginning to increase, to worsen. But I wasn't at that point in my life deeply and seriously and knowledgeably Jewish. What was the bit of connection? Fannie Lou Hamer led picket lines in front of the convention up and down the boardwalk in Atlantic City. And the songs she sang and that I learned from her were songs like Go tell it on the mountain, over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain. Let my people go. Who are the people dressed in white? Let my people go. Must be the children of the Israelite. Let my people go. That was one of them. And another one was, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. And she even sang it some of the time as Tell Bob Moses, because Bob Moses was one of the leading organizers in Mississippi for civil rights and voting rights. So I learned those songs about the Exodus from ancient Egypt, those songs about the liberation of Israelites from Pharaoh. I learned those songs in the context of the civil rights struggle in the United States in my own lifetime. And those songs sort of went into my bloodstream, and they emerged 4 years later in an even more powerful way. But that's another story for another time. Shalom.